So welcome back to our last session on the brothers Karamazov. We've seen that Ivan and Dmitri have both awakened to this realization that they do bear responsibility for others in this world. They are as responsible for others' happiness as they are for their own. This awakening has driven Ivan into madness and Dmitri to make an unrealistic offer of accepting suffering on behalf of humanity, as if that could save all of humanity. And so let's look at if there is some other alternative to this very difficult question of human suffering, and whether there's a hope at all for us to find peaceful communities and our own personal happiness that doesn't depend on some kind of exchange, that my happiness is bought at the expense of your suffering, or my peace is bought at the expense of your suffering. So we see this alternative way being offered in the plot line of Ilyusha, the little boy whose funeral provides the setting for, his gravesite provides the setting for the end of the novel. And Alyosha has been our guide through the novel, leading us into the life of this little boy, Ilyusha, who had, when we first meet him, has been the victim of taunting and scorn and ridicule by the other boys in his school. He's basically the class scapegoat, and everyone forms their sense of goodness over and against Ilyusha. They form a sense of community by excluding him from the community. And as we see this little boy suffer through various emotional torments from his father being publicly ridiculed and humiliated by Dmitri, to the little boy thinking that he's killed a dog, and the truth that the dog lives is kept from him by his mentor, Kolya. And as the boy suffers and becomes sick, more and more sick, Kolya and the other boys rally around him and begin to form community in a different way. Rather than by excluding him, his suffering and his needs become the center of their community. And Kolya finally brings forth the little dog that he's been training and withholding to build up his own sense of pride and self-esteem. And he finally brings the dog to Ilyusha, and everyone is thrilled that they are able to bring a little happiness to this boy's life before he dies. And so at the gravesite, Alyosha is there with the little boys, the friends of Ilyusha, and he's speaking to them of the friendship that they have all grown to have because of the way they have come together around Ilyusha's suffering, rather than excluding him and being blind to his suffering. His suffering has motivated them and formed them into a new community. And I'm going to read a few lines from the end of the novel. Alyosha says to the boys, "Let us always remember how we buried the poor Ilyusha, at whom we once threw stones. Do you remember by the bridge? And afterwards, we all grew so fond of him. He was a fine boy, a kind-hearted, brave boy. We will remember him, boys, all our lives. And even if we are occupied with most important things, if we attain to honor or fall into great misfortune, still, let us always remember how good it was once here, when we were all together, united by a good and kind feeling, which made us for the time we were loving that poor boy better perhaps than we are. So this is a new kind of community that's being formed, not at the expense of another suffering, but around awareness of that suffering. And so we come back to where we began, which is with the parable of the onion. If you remember, the onion is a representation of an act of kindness that an evil woman did once in her life. And this act of kindness in the onion is held out to her as she's suffering in the fires of hell, in this lake of eternal suffering. And as she reaches out to the onion that's being held out to her by an angel, she seeks only her own escape from suffering. And so she kicks at the people, her fellow sufferers, who are reaching out to grab hold of her. And as she kicks at them, she descends back into the lake, and everyone is condemned to suffering. And so I think what Dostoevsky is asking us to consider is that there is no escape from suffering for us individually. One person cannot escape. One group of people cannot escape at the expense of another's. Either we all escape suffering or we all suffer together. It is an illusion to fall into the trap of the Grand Inquisitor, who says that we can be happy and peaceful at the expense of others, because that happiness is a false one. It is not true happiness, as Ivan and Dmitri have shown us. It will lead either to madness or to a false martyrdom. So Dostoevsky's asking us to consider this ethic of responsibility for one another, in that we share in one another's suffering, and in acknowledging that suffering as a way out of the trap of the Grand Inquisitor. So I very much would welcome your comments, your insights into what does this ethic require of us in our personal lives and in our communal lives, in our national life, because it raises as many questions as it answers. Dostoevsky is not here to engage in dialogue with us about what does this ethic look like lived in the moment that we are living in right now. That's up to us to figure out, and I would so welcome you to be part of that conversation. Thank you so much for participating, listening, and watching. Thank you.